Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 meeting of the Washington State Society of American Foresters. My name is Elijah Allensworth. I am the current chair of the South Puget chapter of the SAF, and I'm going to be the MC for this week as we go through this. So we've got a wonderful 5 days of talks ahead of us. Each day has its own theme, and they're all super interesting. Most days we're just going to have 2 talks and then some student presentations, but today is a little special. But first I want to thank all this was really possible due to the speakers, our corporate sponsors, our committee members, and most of all the Northwest office. So Andrea and Melinda, thank you so much. But today's theme is going to be climate and carbon. But our first speaker today is we're going to have a welcome from Terry Baker. So Terry is the CEO of the National Society of American Foresters. He started in 2018, and that was after nearly 20 years in the U.S. Forest Service, where he served on both coasts as a wildland firefighter, a forester, and an administrator. Today, he's here to talk to us about the state of the National Society. And with that, Terry, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Elijah, and thanks everybody for having me. I think I've got about 15 minutes, so I'll take up maybe about 5 to 10 of those and definitely open it up for questions. Love to hear what's on people's minds and hopefully be able to respond to a lot of those. So really excited to have a chance to connect with everyone there in Washington and looking forward to the opportunity to hopefully connecting in person maybe next year for your meeting. But just wanted to give a brief kind of welcome / update to what's going on with the organization nationally. And as I'm sure you've seen in your inboxes, a lot of moving parts with the national office over the past several months. And so I wanted to speak to a few of those things. And like I mentioned, definitely give time for folks to ask questions that they may or may not have. So I'll start from the beginning, kind of the state of the organization in a sense. We are a member association. And so a big win for us last year was that even though it was, about 30 or 40 members to the good, we had a net increase in our membership over where we were at the end of 2020 versus 2021. So that's a big win for us. We've been on a decline for quite some time. And so a big positive, and that has to do with the membership campaign we launched and a lot of the effort that many of you put into, which was reaching out to folks and discussing what was going on with SAF and talking about the value that you saw in the organization and what you were getting from it and how that could translate to those folks and how it was meaningful to you. And so we just saw a lot of folks really either come back to the organization or new members come into the organization with that sense of value and what they could add to not only SAF as an organization, but to our profession as a whole. So really excited about how that went and what we'll continue to do to support folks and moving forward with that and continuing to bring more people into the organization and show value to the organization. The next piece I'd speak to kind of in that same realm was having quite a few conversations with the SAF Board of Directors last year and on a staffing plan and an investment in staffing plan for us as an organization. So we hired between the end of last year and the beginning of this year, we've hired about 9 folks in a variety of positions, mainly support functions for our different director and program areas. So really excited to have those folks on board. They're getting their feet underneath them and starting to really roll out and help us move forward as an organization. As you know, we also implemented or signed off on and started implementation of a strategic plan last year that was looking at how we operate from a business structure standpoint, how we engage our members, what we do related to professional development, how we work with our partners, and that list goes on and on. Our accreditation programs, and so how do we deliver those on those different mission areas as effectively as possible. And one of the obvious things was we needed to invest in staffing to help support those program areas. So really thankful for the board's thoughtful commentary and remarks and support and moving forward with that effort. And really excited about the folks that are on board. Again, great ideas and energy related to how we support and engage our corporate partners, as you were just mentioning, to help out with these events or our different publications. As well as some of our membership work. The other thing that we did last year was we actually conducted an analysis, a portfolio analysis of our membership structure and our just how we operated within the membership arena, how we craft and message our value proposition to our members and those who aren't members. And so we're really excited about pulling from that survey data and that analysis. If you haven't seen, there was actually it's a summary of that report from that consultant is on our website. So if you want to look at some of what they found and some of the analysis that they conducted related to just our membership overall, there was definitely some interesting insights in there. Probably one of the most interesting is there's quite a contingent of folks who think they're members who are not members. So, I mean, it's just something as simple as that. So that, there are things that we need to learn, and again, how we can more effectively communicate and engage folks. Addition to that, we also did some analysis last year related to the possibility of an urban and community forestry certification, similar to our certified forester certification. So pulled together a lot of different partners. As we all know, a lot of folks work in the urban and community forestry arena. So I'm really looking forward to our next steps with that. We had a really good analysis, some good discussions about what it would mean to possibly introduce another credential into that space, and what niche will we be filling as an organization. And so that analysis continues now to delve a little bit more into the financial side of things, but there's been some pretty positive support on what that can mean for us as an organization, as well as for the folks who are practicing in an urban space. So looking forward to next steps with that and making all the necessary announcements, but definitely exciting things on the horizon around our engagement with urban and community forestry. Within accreditation, we just updated our standards for accreditation. So that was finalized at the end of last year. That's a big thing for us. Again, the accreditations that we have are forestry accreditation and urban forestry accreditation, natural resource management accreditation, and a 2-year technical forestry accreditation. And so we have, goodness, I believe it's about 75 or so institutions that are accredited through our accreditation process, and I think somewhere around 80 to 85 programs. So we have a lot of accreditations out there. There's, I think, a lot more opportunity out there, and we're really delving into what those opportunities might be to bring more folks who are receiving degrees within, forestry or natural resources or urban forestry that could be, to the standard that SAF sets. And so we're excited about what that might look like and how these new standards and updated standards may be able to help us with that. The next piece I'd share is that, in the world of policy, we've been extremely busy over the past few years, especially last year. Obviously, we were very excited as an organization to be a part of some of the efforts and conversations that led to the infrastructure package, including forestry as part of the nation's infrastructure, and the roughly $8.5 billion over 5 years going to support, especially fuels management and fire management, but also, again, some urban forestry work across the nation, addressing many challenges that we face in our forest space. And so that designation as infrastructure is so significant that we see the importance of it. It harkens back to 2020 when forest management and forestry work was deemed essential when the shutdowns around the pandemic took place. So a lot of forestry in the spotlight, obviously with various efforts like Trillion Trees and others that we've been really excited to be a part of and be a part of those conversations. And I think we're making some meaningful effort and differences in some of those discussions. In particular, last year, we SAF pledged nationally to be a part of the International Trillion Tree effort, 1T.org. And we did get some questions about why we're decided to be a part of that effort. And I think it's already paid off dividends in some ways, because some of the conversations were, well, they're just talking about planting trees. They're not talking about forest management as a whole. And being a part of that effort, and in partnership with other organizations like the National Association of State Foresters and American Forests and American Forest Foundation as well. What that's done for us is actually being in a space and having conversations with sustainability officers for Amazon and for Hewlett Packard and for some of these other companies. And these are folks who don't have a forestry background. So our ability to have conversations with them, not only about planting trees and that being the solution, but forest management as a whole, what already takes place when it comes to forest management, how do we keep forested lands forested in the first place? Their understanding is growing significantly. And their investment and engagement is changing beyond just, well, we plant trees and we solve the issue. So I think it's actually a really exciting time and opportunity for us to be engaged in some of those conversations, because we're seeing that shift dynamically and understanding beyond Well, the kind of the buzzword has been, let's just plant trees and we can solve the carbon and climate issue. And it's, working forests are part of that solution as well. So we're seeing definitely an evolution of their understanding. Also, the policy arena, our national position statements. Part of that work is, renewing and updating those position statements every 5 years. But we've also gotten to a really good clip of creating new position statements that represent, our current challenges and possibly some things we're seeing in the future. So last year there was a new position statement on recreation, on research. There was one on prescribed fire and wildfire, and I believe there was also one on forest products and markets. And so we're continuing down this path of what are some of those more contemporary challenges and issues that our professionals are facing that we can work on crafting a position statement for and having something that's clear and succinct and well researched to showcase and provide a foundation for our comments nationally, but also to support all of you that you can really taper down into something more locally as you face various forest conversations. So really excited about that work and what that national committee is doing and what they're bringing to us as an organization. So it's continued to be a very interesting dynamic when it comes to policy and engagement in that way. We're learning a lot, and also doing a lot. And so we're excited to see where things go with various partners as well as just as SAF. And as I speak of various partners, we work with pretty much, I don't know if I'd say all, but a significant portion of the national forestry associations. And one of the key things we connect over is policy and how we divvy up the policy basket of things that affect forests and forest products. And so that's something that we do every year, is really look at a list of I think it's a spreadsheet of almost 30 different kind of topic areas from the policy realm, and look at how we split those up and how we, who takes the lead on those various things, because there's simply so many that no one organization can do it all. So we're always looking for how we can partner and support those different organizations taking the lead, and where SAF is going to be the lead, and when we look to support from them as well. Lastly, just a couple of quick comments. Obviously, we're all having more and more conversations about workforce, and workforce has to do as much with just the current workforce challenges that we face, as well as just the relevancy of our profession and the opportunities that it presents. And so constantly we're having more and more conversations with how we're going to step out in that space and really support folks going forward. As a profession, we're seeing it really across the entire sector. So how do we move forward in a good direction for folks? With that, if anyone's looking to change jobs or opportunities, or their students on the call, our Career Center has been quite busy over the last, since the beginning of this year, and definitely towards the end of last year. So there's a lot of opportunities on there. And I always share with folks, even if it's not so much looking at the Career Center, there's also an opportunity to post your resume on the Career Center for when employers have the ability to gain access to just, search different resumes for certain keywords and review resumes of potential folks that they may reach out to directly. So I always want to just have folks be more aware of what the functionality of our Career Center is and the opportunities it provides for folks. And then definitely don't want to leave this conversation without two quick things. One is we're excited about having our convention in person this year in Baltimore, Maryland. So really excited about that. And that's September 20th through 24th. And so really looking forward to seeing faces again and what that means for all of us. I've had a chance to get out to a few state society meetings in person this year, and that's been a common theme. Folks are glad and excited to get back together again in person and have a chance to connect with each other. So really looking forward to that this September, a little bit earlier than normal, but we're really excited about hosting an event again. And then also, obviously, incorporation. There's been a lot of discussion, a lot of work that's being done nationally around how we support our volunteer leaders in particular. And so this gets back to that strategic plan I mentioned. That was one of the key components that we really discussed as a board and staff was what are the pieces that are missing? And we'd heard various challenges with banking and other issues that really led to this discussion about about incorporation. Well, it really led to conversations about structure and how we were structured, and are we structured in a way that's really going to be able to support the ask that we have of our volunteer leaders. And so that led us down this path to incorporation across the country. I know a few states already are. And then also the concept of directors and officers insurance across the nation, which we implemented at the beginning of this year. So we're really excited to have a policy that covers all of our volunteer leaders at the state level, at the local level, and for those that are multi-state, even at the division level, with directors and officers insurance, knowing that that's another layer of safety and support for folks to feel more comfortable in serving in these roles as a volunteer leader, knowing they have key decisions to make for their organizations. So SAF, to put it mildly, I could go on for another probably 20 minutes. Things are very busy. Things are very exciting. Lots going on with the organization, looking at how we leverage partnerships and get more things done for our members and for the profession so we can showcase our value. So definitely an interesting time and a fun time to be in our profession and what it means to the nation and the world as a whole. And so I'm truly excited and honored to be your CEO at this time to make those decisions, to put the people and programs in place to help deliver on that mission. So with that, I'll take my last 4 to 5 minutes and open them up for questions. But again, thanks for having me and thanks for being committed to SAF.
Okay, and I think this is also a small enough group, so if someone wants to raise their hand, we can call on them as well.
I know my presentation wasn't that good, so there's got to be questions out there. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was.
Well, maybe Terry, can you just give us a little preview then of what we can expect to see at National Convention?
Sure. I have to refresh myself a little bit, to be totally honest. There's a lot of moving parts with the convention this year. You know, our theme is a working mosaic, and I think that's a great theme to have for this year. Again, kind of building off of the last few themes that we've had, and you know, just some key highlights and points and discussions related to what that means, how we again cover that spectrum of natural resource management and forest management, from you know, very rural settings to very urban settings, how that connects with communities, how it connects across disciplines. Obviously, we all know even in forestry, we don't work in a vacuum, so there's that regular engagement with various specialists in different backgrounds, and so that's a key piece of our work. And so how do we start to really facilitate some of those engagements? You know, on the more fun side of things, just a reminder that, you know, Quiz Bowl will be returning this year, so we're excited about that. Also looking at some opportunities for, you know, possible events being hosted near the convention center. So I will say the convention center is right there next to the Ravens Stadium and the Orioles Stadium, Camden Yards. So we're looking at what opportunities might be there to have some space for SAF members as well. So a lot of things, you know, innovation zones are coming back. Obviously, people policy and popcorn, we're continuing with those as well. So looking at how we get our partners out in front of folks on very contemporary issues. So yeah, the convention is coming back. We're excited. You know, we're probably a little rusty, but we're looking forward to figuring all those pieces and parts out and having a great convention for everyone.
Great. All right. Well, it looks like now we got questions. So Andy, you raised your hand. You want to go ahead and ask the question? Thanks.
Hi, Terry. Thanks for coming and great
Sure thing.
introduction. You know, the Forest Service has seemed to have doubled down on a lot of their commitment to everything forestry over the last year or so, with some legislation pledging to spend a lot of money for a lot of different things. And I was wondering how and they've changed leadership too with the chief. How have what's your impression on them reaching into us as the uncontested authority for as a professional society to reach into our communities, and maybe some of your thoughts about us reaching out to help the Forest Service?
Sure. There are quite a few of those conversations that are going on between us and the Forest Service. Definitely that's has picked up in the past past, you know, several months, but definitely, you know, with this infrastructure discussion and a few others, you know, really figuring out where those opportunities for the organizations to connect and support each other. You know, something that we've been doing over the past, actually it's been quite a while, maybe 6 or 7 years, is SAF has been partnering with the Forest Service and co-hosting the FIA user group meeting annually. And in addition to that, you know, various other sub user groups. So As most people know, forest inventory and analysis, one of our favorite topics, but this massive data set within the Forest Service around basically land data, forest data, vegetation data across the country. And so, so there's discussions about who uses that data and what uses are out there and what are things that could be done to augment the data set, or ways that the data set could be manipulated in different ways to be more useful. And then there's a few different what we call sub meetings associated with that. So there's a timber products outputs meeting, there's the National Woodland Owners Survey meeting, and a few others that we do. And sometimes they just want to have specialized discussions around what FI data could be used for. So just recently we held a meeting for them around carbon and climate. So that's something that we've continued to work with the agency on, especially as that as unbiased as possible third party related to forest management. In addition to that, you've probably seen a couple of advertisements recently about focused hiring efforts within the Forest Service around foresters and forestry technicians, and now even recreation managers. So again, kind of facilitating that as much as we can and getting the message out, as far and wide as we can in partnership with them. And the list goes on and on. There's various conversations that I've had with different leaders within the Forest Service, sharing information about what's going on with SAF, especially in particular related to some of those position statements I mentioned, and sharing those with them, because some of the leaders and administrators aren't aware that those exist. So we definitely start to just build some of those relationships and connections and create more of a connection to SAF in that sense. So just kind of rebuilding that understanding of us as a resource. And I think that's going to continue to grow over the next several months and years as this work, continues to grow, definitely beyond, again, the scope of them doing it by themselves. Obviously, with shared stewardship and some of those other discussions. So there's quite a bit going on, and there's going to be more and more going on as we go forward. So yeah, there's lots going on with the Forest Service, and I think that's as it should be. And I'm looking forward to how it may grow over time.
Okay, thank you.
Sure thing.
Yes. All right. So Krish May should ask how many societies have completed the incorporation process, and can you give a brief, or can you discuss the D&O insurance piece?
Sure thing. So as far there's a handful, I believe there's roughly about 5 or so state societies that were already incorporated before we started this process. At this point, Lori Razor has connected with all of our state societies, including the one, minus the ones that, well, all of them in general, and then the ones that actually need to be incorporated. So everyone has their paperwork into our lawyers, and that's been reviewed. Lori's been going through the next round of questions from our legal counsel, and we'll be reconnecting with those state societies related to actually getting those filings in place. I think the important thing to know is, like, as you would imagine, each state is different, so that's its own unique dynamic there. And so working through that, and in particular when we have multi-state societies, so for instance, Appalachian SAF, Allegheny SAF, Southeastern SAF, even Colorado, Wyoming, then there's a nuance there to which state you get incorporated in. So there's a process going on, and we're taking those steps in a very thoughtful way to make sure we get everything right and get those I's dotted and T's crossed. Another piece I will share with you is that, another decision the board made was to cover this from a financial standpoint with our legal counsel, to go through this incorporation process and file those incorporations on behalf of all the state societies, in partnership with them, but on behalf of them. So we don't have folks trying to figure out, what type of entity to incorporate as, and several things that again, not necessarily the expertise of our members. So we're really excited about that and getting that done. But we've made some good strides, thanks to all the folks that have gotten a lot of information pulled together and into us, so that we can get that processed and back out. The D&O insurance, again, the directors and officers insurance is something that the SAF Board of Directors nationally has held for many, many years. And ultimately what it is it provides a layer of personal protection. If someone were to say that, a great example would be almost like, we were holding this meeting in person and someone tripped and fell, and they were going to say, if someone were to say, like, I'm going to sue Washington SAF, there's a general liability policy that we carry for all state societies that covers that. But they could turn around and say, well, I'm also going to sue Elijah for being the host, or whoever Marissa for being the chair of Washington SAF. And and depending on how that all worked out, there could be some personal liability there. And so the directors and officers insurance creates the space and creates another line of support and, for lack of a better term, defense against that liability for all of our folks who serve in those roles as executive volunteer leaders within SAF. So that's where the directors and officers insurance policy comes from. And as we discussed that with the House of Society delegates last year, there was a lot of interest in how we might apply that to everyone. So that is something that we implemented this year.
All right, great. Thanks, Terry. So we actually have 2 more questions, but we do need to move on to Catherine's presentation. So Terry, maybe you could answer them in the chat.
Sure, can do.
Great. All right, Elijah.
Thanks, everybody.
Well, thank you, Terry. I really appreciate your talk. Super interesting and great for the rest of us to hear what's kind of going on at the national level. So for our next talk today, we're going to have Catherine Morse, who's a landowner success manager for Natural Capital Exchange, also known as NCX. She helps to reach out to, educate, and manage relationships with forest landowners at NCX. And today she's here to talk to us about their forest carbon program. Catherine, whenever you're ready, take it off.
Great. Thank you so much, Elijah. I'm going to share my screen. I just have some slides. I'm going to run through that, help along with the presentation. All righty, that should show up on everyone's end. Okay, let me know if there are any problems. Yeah, so again, thank you so much for having NCX speak and for inviting us to present at the meeting today. We're really excited to be able to present our forest carbon program and provide a new opportunity for landowners to gain revenue from their forest land. So I'll talk about, who NCX is. I'll go into, how we came to the point we are today. I'll go into our forest carbon program, what we're doing here, and then how landowners can actually enroll and the involvement that foresters play in, in the program. I'll also run through some frequently asked questions that we get from landowners and foresters at the very end, but then, I'll open it up just to questions if you all have any questions for me now. And then I also have some contact information at the last slide for you to reach out to our team afterwards if interested in, reaching out to us afterwards. Alrighty, so just going into, what we're doing here, kind of who we are. So NCX, Natural Capital Exchange, was formerly known as Sylvia Terra. We actually changed our name just in the last year. So we actually, we're focused on remote sensing products. Our co-founder is Zach Priss and Max Nova. They met at the Yale School of Forestry. And they, were working, again, really hard in about over 10 years on remote sensing products. And in their work with, the timber industry and forestry professionals, they noticed that, in the trillions of dollars of value that society, that forest provides to society, vast majority of that value is neither measured nor paid for. So, we are really working to develop the tools necessary to measure that value and be able to create a marketplace where landowners are paid for these ecosystem services. So we're starting, we've started with forest carbon, with credits, via harvest deferral. However, we do plan to move into these other ecosystem services. So credits such as, water, biodiversity credits, wildfire mitigation credits, which is especially, important in the West and in the Pacific Northwest. So really excited to, jump into those other credit types in the near future. However, we're here to talk about our forest carbon program. So just going into that more. So, our vision for our forest carbon program really is to be able to create a marketplace that is open to every American forest landowner to participate in a carbon program. As our team, was working in remote sensing products and working with landowners across the country, we saw that majority of, forest carbon programs were barring a majority of landowners from participation. This looks like, barriers to entry such as high transaction costs where you had to pay for your own measurements. It looks like high, contract terms where, long contract terms where, 40 to 100 years contracts. And then also, having high acreage minimums. So having at least a few thousand acres to participate. So we saw these barriers to entry and then worked to develop the tools necessary to measure the carbon on the property and be able to, again, accurately measure so we can create a marketplace where landowners are paid for this carbon on the property. So that brings me to, what sets us apart from other voluntary carbon programs. So that looks like our 1-year term. So we only have 1-year harvest deferral terms. And then there's 0 enrollment fees. So there is no cost to the landowner to participate at any time in our program. And then there's also no acreage minimums. So, we've seen properties with about 15, 20 acres enroll in the program. That's kind of the lowest we've seen thus far. And I mentioned, being able to measure everything accurately. That really is the crux of our program. If you can't measure something accurately, you can't create a market for it. You can't place value on that service. So NCX really is on our base, it's built on our base map technology. So we, worked with Microsoft a few years back to develop base map, which is the first ever high resolution forest map of the entire US. This is kind of a screenshot of it here in the background, but it's able to estimate, allows us to estimate the size and species of trees on every acre of forest in the US. And our base map technology utilizes these following sources here, and a whole lot of computing power to be able to, again, provide these measurements of standing inventory. So I mentioned, how we're able to, have the foundation to conduct the measurements via base map and kind of what we're doing here. But I do like to jump into this slide that covers, the 3-step process of our harvest deferral program and how exactly it works, how exactly it is creating this additional carbon on the landscape. So, just to zoom out a little bit, our harvest deferral program, our program really is, incentivizing landowners to defer some or all harvesting activity over 1-year terms. And this deferred harvest then creates additional carbon stored on the landscape, which buyers then purchase in the form of carbon offsets, to offset their emissions. So that's that, general overview of our program. And then I'm just going to jump into the 3-step process here. So the first step is measurement and enrollment. So making sure that, in order to incentivize the landowner to defer harvest, we need to prove that there's a risk of harvest on that property. We need to make sure that this additional carbon stored on the landscape. If it's not additional carbon, that's, greenwashing. There's no effect on the landscape at that point. So this first step is extremely key, making sure that there is a risk of harvest on that property to, again, incentivize the landowner not to harvest that year. So, in order to measure this harvest risk, we come up with a business as usual scenario for each property that we assess in the program. So we look at, 2 key factors. We look at standing inventory via base maps. We look at the carbon storage potential. And then we look at this harvest risk. And I'll expand on some of these harvest risk factors in a few slides, but this, looks like the terrain and operability of a landowner's parcels. This looks like the, proximity to mills, the mill demand in their area, really these property level baselines to prove that there is a risk of harvest on that property in the upcoming year. So once we do assess the harvest risk and standing inventory, we then provide each landowner with a eligibility report that quantifies this eligibility in the form of harvest deferral credits, we call them HDCs. And then they move to this NCX marketplace. So if they choose to participate in the auction in the marketplace, they can then bid on their credits and they can decide how much harvesting they want to defer and at what cost it makes them to, at what cost it makes sense for them to defer this harvest for 1 year. We then pool all the landowner bids together, overlay it with prices that buyers are willing to pay for the credits. And then we come to a market clearing price where it decides, again, based on supply and demand, what that best price is for the landowner and what, the price that makes sense for the buyers as well, depending on, the different kind of offset credits that they're looking at as well. And any landowner that is accepted, has their bid accepted into the program, is then moved into this harvest reduction step, this 3rd step, where they're agreeing to, again, defer that contracted amount of harvest for that 1-year term. And then we monitor and audit this deferred harvest and conduct a second remote assessment at the end of the term year, verifying that these deferrals were met and that the, that this additional carbon was stored on the landscape, and then we issue the payment to the landowner and issue the credits to the buyers. So kind of a mouthful there, but I do like to again cover this full process just to make sure, because carbon programs, forest carbon programs, they're not new, but they are done in different ways for some programs. So our program is a little bit different. It's quite different with our one year harvest deferral term. So I do like to cover how exactly this works and how it's creating this additional carbon on the landscape. So I went through kind of how it works, how our program works, and what we're doing here. But if again, carbon programs aren't new, and we really are striving to make sure that this is creating additional carbon stored on landscape, and that this is creating climate impact. So with this, we have a lot of carbon programs are broken down in terms of the impact they're making in terms of these three key factors: permanence, additionality, and leakage. So this chart just shows kind of how we're addressing each of these key factors in comparison to, the kind of legacy forest carbon program, kind of the standard a carbon program model that was existing beforehand. So permanence is making sure that this is permanent climate impact, that this is, making an impact on the landscape. So with that, we make sure to do our payment on delivery. So we only pay the landowner once we've verified that this harvest deferral commitment was met. We don't pay landowners upfront for their contract. They're paid upon delivery of the deferrals. And then in terms of additionality, this is making sure that this is additional carbon stored on the landscape, so that this isn't just carbon that would be stored on the property anyway. So with this, we do our targeted acre by acre baselines, making sure that we're measuring, again, each property and the harvest risk on each property that we assess in the program. And then leakage. So there's two types of leakage, market shifting leakage and activity shifting leakage. Market shifting leakage is, essentially where if we reduced harvesting activity in one area, it would just move to another area. So in the larger market sense. So with that, we are addressing that market shifting leakage by making sure that we are providing a program that's available to all landowners. So, we've really democratized access to this program so that all landowners in the contiguous US can participate in the program. And then property shifting, property activity shifting leakage is addressed by ensuring that all landowners are enrolling all of the property under their ownership. And actually we're assessing all of those land holdings to make sure that, again, they're not increasing harvesting on parcels that are unenrolled. And I do like to go further into this additionality piece. This really is key to make sure that it's a key factor, making sure that we're, again, creating this climate impact. So we do these property level baselines for every participant. And we use the inventory from base map using FIA plot data and the other sources I mentioned in that base map slide. And then some other key factors really play into this harvest risk as well. So ownership type, plays a factor, what kind of common management practices for each ownership type, access to markets. So, how far a property is from, a mill in their area. And then also the market conditions. So we do look at mill pressure and the commonly paid, prices paid at mills in their region. And all of these factors are also updated on a regular basis to make sure that for each cycle, this is the most up-to-date, data sets that we can reference to, again, measure these property level baselines. And, while we've been working through this program, it's been really important that we get, third-party certified. So this is just a slide going through kind of, our overview of our Vera certification process. So we are currently going through this process with Vera. They're a third-party, standards body to get a full certification of our credits. And we're actually in the public consultation phase where our methodology is currently open for public review. And you can learn more on our website. We have a post that we just put out a few weeks ago, again, announcing this public consultation, but anyone can, review our methodology and comment on it and review it. And we do expect this full certification to be complete by the fall of this year. It is an ongoing process though. So going into some numbers here. So, we are actually in the 4th commercial cycle of NCX. The numbers for the 2021 calendar year, we had over 3.7 million acres enrolled across 48 states, and over 2,400 landowners were accepted into a cycle and are currently participating. So, we started in Pennsylvania in a pilot program a few years back, and we conducted that full year-long program. And then we actually opened up our spring 2021 cycle. That was the first cycle, first commercial cycle. We opened that up to the Southeast states. And then the summer 2021 cycle was opened up to the Lake states, New York and Pennsylvania. And then our winter cycle was actually the first cycle that was open to all states in the contiguous US. And here are some numbers of the based on the winter cycle here. Again, first cycle that was open to all landowners in the contiguous US, and we enrolled 2 million acres across 39 states. There were 15 times the amount of landowners, participating this cycle compared to the first cycle of 2021. So really exciting to see that growth. And then we had 1,800 participants. And an interesting factor here is that about a quarter of our current landowners are represented by a forester, and I'll go into that in the next slide. But participating, have a landowner being represented by their forester is really key to our program. And another, kind of interesting factor here in terms of Washington State specifically for this, winter cycle that closed in, late last year. We have about 60 landowners from Washington State that are currently in that cycle that we, assess for that cycle. And then we assess a little over 1.57 million acres. This was skewed by a few larger, more industrial landowners. Again, the average kind of about a half of our assessed properties are under 500 acres. So that's not the normal, distribution for these large landowners, but we, again, about 50% of our assessed properties are under 500. But yeah, just some stats there about Washington State. And going into, the role that foresters play, it's really important for our landowners to, if they have a forester, to be represented by a forester. We've seen that, it really helps implement our program into their management plan, make sure that, they're pricing their credits at the price that makes sense for them. And it just really helps them, make sure that, again, this process works for their own motivations and their plans for their land. We do have it is work for the forester to help a landowner through the program though. So we did, create a affiliate program, consulting forester and affiliate program, where foresters are paid, a kind of a compensation structure. And we provide additional resources upon, participation in our affiliate program. We provide a multi-account dashboard that foresters can use to manage all their landowners in one account. And then we provide additional resources such as, webinar trainings and, additional packets and flyers that they can utilize. So this is just a 3-step process to be able to participate in the consulting forester and affiliate program. The application link is just ncx.com/foresters. Once you are accepted, you just, get designated as the affiliate for the landowners that you are helping enroll. And then that 3rd step is that at the end of the term year, upon completion of the cycle, affiliates will receive 2% of the total harvest deferral payments that are sent to the landowners that they help enroll. And that's on top of the landowner payment. It's not from the landowner payment. So just that compensation structure is, an incentive as well, because we do know that it is time a forester has to spend to, help their landowner through the process. I do like to cover some, information about why landowners, are motivated to join the program though. Motivations are highly individual, but some of these themes include, yearly income. Instead of just waiting for the trees to mature, you can receive that yearly income as your trees grow in value. And then, our program specifically, we think it's pretty easy to implement to management plans. A landowner can decide how much harvesting they want to defer. So you can actually, you can continue on with a thinning or a harvesting as planned. You just account for that in the bid submission process. And then the environmental impact is huge. Again, we've democratized access to this program, especially for smaller family landowners. So being able to participate in a program at this scale that has this impact is a driving factor as well. And it's a really exciting time to be part of this type of program. So this is just 3-step process of how landowners actually can, what the process looks like for requesting that free assessment for landowners. So, if a forester has a multi-account dashboard, this will actually be the same link, landowners.ncx.com, and that will have a dashboard where you can manage all of your landowners in one place. But for each landowner, you will have to follow this process where you provide their general contact and property information. And we need the boundaries for all of their land holdings mapped out in their landowner account. And then you can review some enrollment documents, our example seller agreement, and we have a frequently asked question document that's helpful as well. And then you just request that free assessment. So this is a key, this is, highlighted there, all the property under your ownership. So we do require that all of their land holdings get mapped out and that we assess all of their land holdings. However, as I mentioned, they can decide how much harvesting they're willing to defer upon participating in the auction. So I covered a lot of this. I'm not going to go through each step specifically. It's a fair amount of information, but that 3-step process that I covered, one of the first slides, really is, that covers the full breadth of our program. This is just showing the landowner steps and how that process is broken down on the landowner side. And this has an example of the current cycle that we're currently enrolling for. So we do have 4 cycles per year. We run on quarterly program cycles, and we're currently enrolling for the summer of 2022 cycle. We just closed our spring of 2022 cycle, and the results for that auction will be available soon. That just recently closed. So this is just, showing the dates for what that process looks like for an example cycle. We're currently in the enrollment period. We'll start distributing eligibility reports next week, showing landowners how much, carbon is at risk on their property. And then we'll, open up participation in the auction process where they can bid on their credits and decide if they want to, again, participate and how much harvesting they want to defer. And a note here is that up until this point, there is no commitment for a landowner to participate at any time. So this is kind of a key factor if you're walking landowners through the process, that it's a completely commitment free until you submit a bid. Upon submitting a bid, bidding on your credits, that's when, if your bids are accepted, you are participating in that cycle. Up until that auction process, that bid submission process, there's no, commitment to participate. But if a landowner's bid is accepted, they enter into that year-long harvest deferral. And then at the end of the performance period, we conduct that second remote assessment and issue payment to the landowner. And that timing is about 30 to 60 days after the contract term period ends. And this is just a quick video that shows what our mapping process looks like. So I do like to put it in context because, again, this enrollment step can seem kind of daunting of, how landowners can actually enroll in the process. So for each landowner, if you're helping them through the process, this is what it'll look like. This is what the mapping process looks like. We do have a shapefile upload button here. If a landowner has shapefiles, it's definitely the easiest way to upload their boundaries. However, if they do not, we have a parcel select tool that allows you to search for the specific, location. If the property has an address, you can search for the address here. It works similarly to like a Google map. And then you zoom into the specific parcel, select it, and then just click save and continue. Make sure that the acreage looks correct. And then this is what the dashboard looks like. This is what the landowner account looks like, where you can then sign off on these statements, making sure that you are, signing off that, the property boundaries are accurate, that they represent the land holdings, and then you just click request assessment. And a note here is that this is what the landowner, again, dashboard looks like. And for the foresters, the multi-account dashboard will have 2 tabs at the top where they can see all of their accounts listed in one place. But if you do click on a specific landowner in their account, this is what it'll look like within each account. So it'll have all their account settings, property information, and some, again, general account info. And also a note here is that if a landowner is or if you're at all kind of interested to see what part of the cycle a landowner is in, this will always tell you kind of what exactly the next steps are. So let me just show you here. After you click request assessment, it'll say, you know, what currently is in the works, what to expect next. So it'll always show that in that, you know, main home screen of the dashboard. So I'm just going to go into a few frequently asked questions that we get from landowners and from foresters on, you know, payment, you know, some seller agreement questions. You know, the primary question that we get from both landowners and foresters is, of course, about payment. You know, what does payment look like? What is average payment? So our primary recommendation is just to get a free assessment, just to get that assessment to see what it looks like for your property. As I mentioned, we do evaluate so many different factors. So the same size property in one area could look completely different in terms of harvestable credits compared to the same size property in another area. You know, again, we look at the standing inventory, so the carbon storage potential. We look at the roads, you know, the slope of the parcels. We look at you know, proximity to mills, mill demand in the area, a bunch of different factors. So again, our primary recommendation is just to get a free assessment. However, you know, I do like to provide some numbers. We do, of course, have averages. So, you know, an example average I can put out there is that, you know, based on the last 2 cycles, if you're looking at, you know, a 200-acre property in the Pacific Northwest in Washington, it's about $13 an acre annually. So that's, again, for a 200-acre property, it's an example there as to what an average payment could look like, but it does vary based on parcel size, ownership type, a bunch of different factors. So if a landowner is still really, you know, hesitant in even just enrolling or getting a free assessment, they can always reach out to us and let us know, you know, their parcel size and region, and we'll provide them with the averages that we've seen in the last 2 cycles. A note that also the price per credit also does depend on the auction and the price per credit decided on that specific cycle. So again, the price paid per landowner for that, you know, each cycle does depend on that market clearing price as well. Another key question that we commonly get is, you know, why do I have to enroll all the property under my ownership? And does this mean that I have to defer harvest across my entire acreage? So we do require that landowners, I mentioned this a few times, but we like to reiterate it. So it's pretty key to our program. So we do require that landowners get, you know, we assess all of their land holdings in the program. So we assess again, the carbon at risk on that property in the upcoming year. And then we provide the eligibility report. But then from there, they can decide how much harvesting they want to defer and at what cost it makes sense for them to do so. And we provide a ton of resources to help landowners through the bid submission process, but you're essentially able to estimate during that bid submission process, you're able to estimate how much harvesting you're expecting to happen, how much merchantable volume you're expecting to take off in the upcoming year. And then we have a conversion formula of both tonnage and board feet to these harvestable credits. You can then calculate what that conversion looks like, you know, the conversion again to harvestable credits, and then reduce your bid accordingly. And just to put it in perspective, you know, 1 harvestable credit is about equal to 25 green tons of pine or about 19 green tons of mixed hardwood. It's about 1 truckload in most areas. So a landowner can then use that formula. I'm going into the weeds a little bit. We do have a lot of resources to help, you know, explain the process as the landowner goes through the bid submission process. But I do like to provide some context. So a landowner, you know, if we give them 100 harvestable credits and they're expecting to take off the equivalent of 100, you know, tons of pine in the upcoming year through different management practices, they can then just reduce their bid by 4 credits because they're estimating that they'll take off that amount worth of harvestable credits in the upcoming year. So that's just an example of how a landowner would go through the bid submission process and estimate volume reduction. Another question we commonly get is about the buyers. So, you know, I'm on the landowner side and my presentations are all about landowners and foresters, but of course there would be no functioning marketplace if someone wasn't actually purchasing these credits. So some of the buyers we've seen in the last few cycles, you know, Shell, Cargill, Microsoft, you know, Rubicon, another example. These are largely largely we've seen, Fortune 100, 500 companies that are looking to offset their emissions by purchasing, again, these carbon credits. And this is largely through consumer demand. Again, it's a voluntary carbon program. But yeah, either reach sustainability targets, net zero commitments, just again, offset their emissions. And then, another question we commonly get is about re-enrollment. So we do only offer 1-year harvest roll terms. However, a landowner can request re-enrollment at the end of the term year. So for example, if they participated in the summer 2022 cycle that's upcoming, they can actually request re-enrollment in the summer 2023 cycle. So they're able to request a new assessment for that cycle. Again, we do update the factors that determine harvest risk and eligibility. We do update those data sets, not the factor, we update the data sets. So they just need to request a new assessment, and then they can participate in the auction for that cycle again, because the price does depend on supply and demand for each cycle. So they would have to request re-enrollment. However, they can re-enroll if interested. So that covers the frequently asked questions that we get, again, the full kind of breadth of our program, and what sets us apart from other forest carbon programs. So I do have some dates here just for the current summer cycle that we're enrolling at the moment, and a few links here, link to our Forester homepage, and then the email if you want to reach out to our team and ask any questions. That is also the email to reach out to us about Forester questions as well. This landowners@ncx.com. So yeah, just feel free to reach out if you have any questions, but I hope this was helpful as you evaluate the program, either for yourself if you have land or for your landowners. So really appreciate the time.
Nice. All right. Thank you, Catherine. We have quick time for one question, and then there's a few in the chat that you can answer after the fact.
Okay, great. Sounds great.
How does NCX deal with commercial thinnings done to reduce fire risk so that the whole above ground carbon pool for a given site is not lost?
Yeah, great question. So any kind of management practice that removes merchantable volume, so whether it's doing, clearing via, doing a prescribed burn, or even doing a thinning or harvesting, anything that takes off merchantable volume, we would request that you convert that, estimate that tonnage removal, and then convert it to harvest of roll credits and reduce the bid accordingly. That's, even if it's to make sure that this is for a specific management practice that increases carbon storage, it's still dealt with in the same fashion in terms of that auction and reducing your bids accordingly. Great question.
All right, great, thank you. All right, I'll turn it back over to Elijah. And like I said, Catherine, there's 2 other questions you can answer in the chat.
Yeah, sounds great. I'll respond to those in the next few minutes. Awesome.
Perfect.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, thank you, Catherine. It was a super informative talk. And I know for myself, at least, I'm pretty excited to see how you guys deal with the other ecosystem services down the road. But I really appreciate you coming out and talking with us. So our next speaker today is going to be Chenka Favarini Chorba, who is a senior policy advisor at the Washington State Department of Natural Resources, where she leads agency-wide climate resilience and carbon sequestration efforts. Today, she's going to come talk to us about the DNR's plan for climate resilience. Chenka, are you ready to give your talk?
I am.
Perfect. Well, I'll pass it over to you then.
Okay. And I should be sharing the right one. We'll see what happens.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, let me just see what happens when I go into presentation mode. Okay, you should be seeing the correct view.
Looks good.
Okay, great. So yeah, so my name is Chenka Favarini Chorba, and as Elijah said, I'm a senior policy advisor for climate and community resilience at Washington State DNR. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about our plan for climate resilience, but first I wanted to just give a little bit of context about DNR to begin with, because I think it really frames just how we have to think about climate resilience. So as an agency, we manage 5.6 million acres of various types of land, from forest land to agricultural land, aquatic ecosystems, and then some commercial properties as well. And with these different types of land, DNR has different roles that we take on. So we have 2.4 million acres of forested state trust lands that we manage on behalf of specific beneficiaries like schools and libraries alongside other public institutions, as well as counties. And so with our trust lands, we have a fiduciary responsibility to generate revenue for the trust. And so that means that, of course, that kind of puts a specific lens on how we manage our forested trust lands. And it means that we usually generate revenue through long-term timber production. Although I'll talk a little bit about a new way that we're going to be generating revenue at the end of my presentation, which is through a carbon project. But alongside the revenue generation that the revenue that we generate through timber production, we also protect habitat for threatened and endangered species. About 40% of our land is set aside for our habitat conservation plan, which is responsive to specific protections necessary for marbled murrelet and spotted owl, things like that. We protect ecosystem services like watersheds and other important services that our forests provide. And then our forests also offer recreation opportunities for the public. Beyond that, we have about 2.6 million acres of state-owned aquatic lands. And so that's actually the beds and shores of navigable waters in the state. So it's sort of the land underneath the water for navigable waters. We have a little bit of a different mandate when it comes to our aquatic lands. We don't have to generate revenue, we can, but that gives us a little bit more flexibility in terms of treating handling our aquatic lands with objectives in mind, like public use and access, environmental protection, and other types of goals. And then we can also generate revenue from those lands as long as it doesn't conflict with any of the other goals. And then we've got about 1.1 million acres of state trust lands that are leased for agriculture and grazing. So Washington DNR lands are actually some of the largest wheat producers in the state. And so we've just got a lot of different types of lands and roles as an agency. And then this is all in the context too of a very diverse state when it comes to our ecosystems and our ecoregions. So we've got the moist, carbon dense forests on the west side, and then we've got dry, fire adapted forests and rangelands on the east side. We have our coastline. We've got South Puget Sound, which is, in really the midst of some pretty populated areas. And then we've got the Salish Sea up further north as well, which, is where we see our orcas and is habitat for salmon and things like that. So our plan for climate resilience was released in February 2020. And of course, given everything that I just explained about the lands that DNR manages, it had to cover a lot. So these are some of the focus areas from that plan. So it thought through our relationship with tribal nations and how we can support their climate resilience, equity and environmental justice, of course, thinking about carbon emissions and carbon sequestration, both in terms of DNR's own carbon emissions through our fleets and facilities, as well as the opportunities for natural and working lands to sequester carbon at greater rates. Wildfire management is a big one for Washington, given our increasingly catastrophic fires on the east side. And then, of course, other things like just forest management and agricultural management and conservation. We also host the Washington Geological Surveys for the state. And so that means that we're also thinking about other types of risks like tsunamis and landslides. And so we're working on a 2-year update. Of course, given that our plan was published in February 2020, COVID has impacted a number of things that we had included in the plan at first. But we've nevertheless been able to make progress. And we've actually hired a Chief Resilience Officer, Marissa Aho, who's been leading on this update process. And we also now have 3 staff, in addition to Marissa, that have resilience in their title. So myself as a senior policy advisor, and then 2 recently hired policy advisors for resilience, which has really enabled us to, to focus on moving this work forward. And so one piece of the process has been compiling an updated list of the various shocks and stressors and complicating factors that impact the resilience of Washington's ecosystems and communities. And, given DNR's diverse and varied land base and the many different ways that we interact with communities, there's of course a lot of factors to consider. And I won't go through all of these, but you can see the variety of things that we have to consider when we're planning for the resilience of our climate and our communities in the state. So given that there is such a variety of things in our plan for climate resilience, I'm not going to talk about everything, but I wanted to highlight just a few solid examples of the type of things that we're working on. So the first is our support for implementation of our 20-year forest health strategic plan and our other wildfire and forest management plans. This is an example of something that was included in the plan that was really ongoing work, something that we would have been doing with or without the plan for climate resilience, but of course is very related to climate resilience and how we manage our lands to be resilient to a very particular threat, namely wildfire. We also have a goal to advance clean energy and carbon sequestration on DNR managed lands. So this is a little bit of a different focus area. It's thinking about how can we use our lands for clean energy production, whether it's solar or wind, as well as then how can we think about the opportunities for carbon sequestration, in our aquatic lands and blue carbon and our 2.4 million acres of forest lands and elsewhere. Another different type of role that we play is supporting small forest landowners, so owners of private forest land. And one of the threats that we've identified is that there's increasing rates of conversion of forest land in the private sector, where we're seeing, small forest landowners just succumb to, pressures of development, and with, COVID increasing folks working remotely and everybody wanting their own slice of heaven, we're really seeing that forest lands are more and more being permanently converted to other land use. And so one of the goals that we identified was, in our role as a state agency that supports small forest landowners and has a small forest landowner office, would be to enhance the retention of working forest land by small private landowners. And then another one, and a different type of example, is developing strategies to protect and restore our aquatic habitats. So again, with our aquatic lands, we have a great deal of flexibility. So we're able to manage specifically for ecosystem and species goals. And so we can really make, we have a lot of autonomy to make decisions about how to best protect our ecosystems and species. So a few updates for those goals, and a little bit more specifics in terms of metrics. So for our 20-year forest health strategic plan, we had identified a goal to complete forest health treatments across 1.25 million acres by 2037. So this was part of a process of identifying the acres in Eastern Washington that were at highest risk for the impacts of catastrophic wildfire, and that were in greatest need of prescribed burns or thinnings to help reduce that risk. And so we've actually reached about 363,000 total treated acres since the plan was released in 2017. So we're well on our way to our goal there, which is great. And then for our emissions reductions and carbon sequestration, we had set a goal of 500 megawatts or 5,000 acres of new solar power under lease. So leasing 5,000 acres of our land for the purposes of generating energy through solar. And currently we have about 1,300 acres under lease for solar. So again, we're well on our way there, although of course that's a closer goal. So we've got a little bit of ways to go. For our small forest landowner support, we had a goal to hire staff. We recognize that, you know, we've basically got a couple of staff per region, and given the, you know, hundreds or thousands of small forest landowners needing support in each region, it's clearly not enough. And so one of the ways that we identified that we could better support small forest landowners and hopefully help stem the tide against conversion was to just hire more staff so that they had more folks that were available to them to answer questions. And so we've got 4 out of those 7 hired, and I think we've got a couple more on the way for the remainder of the year to reach that goal. And for our aquatic resources, we had a goal to conserve and restore 10,000 acres of kelp forests and eelgrass meadows by 2040. So our kelp forests and eelgrass meadows are really important, both in terms of habitat for different salmonoid species, as well as they're important in the food chain for species like orca that depend on salmon. And so we actually just announced earlier this year, it was only a couple weeks ago, the state's first kelp and eelgrass protection zone, where we're going to be limiting the types of leases for this particular area, which covers about 2,300 acres, and limiting the types of uses for that area so that the kelp forest and eelgrass meadows can better thrive. So I wanted then to dive into, in my last couple of minutes, just dive into one specific area as a case study for some of the work that we've been doing as well. So under our goal of increasing carbon sequestration on DNR lands, we have been exploring for the last number of years how DNR as a state agency can enter into a carbon project. And we've just recently made an announcement, just last week actually, that we're going to be entering a 10,000 acre forest carbon project. And so this will be the first time that a state agency is using carbon markets to immediately remove stands that were slated to be harvested and to conserve them instead. Michigan has a forest carbon program, which is really great. And it's an improved forest management program where they'll be continuing to harvest according to a kind of modified schedule. But for our project, we're going to be just immediately removing these 10,000 acres from any future harvests. And this is going to generate about 900,000 carbon credits just in the first 10 years, which is the equivalent to the carbon released from over 2 billion miles driven by gas-powered cars. So these are forests on the west side. There are extremely carbon-rich forests, you know, some of the most carbon-rich forests in the US and even the world. And so when we set these areas aside, they are carbon powerhouses, and they're currently storing a lot of carbon. And because we've got various age ranges in the project, ages of the stands, then they'll continue to sequester carbon going forward as well. And we're using the high conservation value framework to identify these forested areas. Some of you might be familiar with it. It's part of what FSC uses as well in their certification. And so the criteria include things like significant concentrations of biodiversity, landscape scale ecosystems, threatened or endangered habitats, basic ecosystem services, especially around water, so watershed protection. And then it also incorporates social and cultural values, including subsistence level needs for Indigenous populations and local communities, as well as then sites or resources that are important to the cultural heritage of Indigenous populations and local communities. So we're announcing this in phases. So what we announced last week was the first 2,500 acres of the 10,000 acre goal. And these are forested acres, like I said, on the west side. They're in a number of counties across Washington. many of the stands are mature, older stands, but that are not, protected by existing policy. We've got an old growth policy, but it's pretty specific. And so these are stands that don't meet the old growth policy, but are still important ecologically because of their mature stands and because of the carbon that they're storing currently and will continue to sequester. And then we'll be using this framework the HCV framework to identify the remaining 7,500 acres for the project, and committing to remove those from our harvest schedule. So I'll stop there and leave a few minutes for any questions. But yeah, so there's lots that we're working on, and it's kind of a diverse array of things. So I wanted to give a little bit of a sample, but yeah, happy to take any questions.
Well, I have one question first. So looking at the forest carbon project, so which company are you working with for that certification and to handle the analysis for the carbon?
Yeah, so Finite Carbon is the project developer that we're working with on that.
Nice too. And so with that, with the properties being scattered across multiple counties, will you be working with like maybe county commissioners or local groups in that area? I mean, what would the communication be around now the fact that these acres are going to be now put into carbon instead of actively managed for like timber production or such? What will that communication dialogue be with those counties?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's part of the reason why we announced the project in phases. So we wanted to announce our intent for this carbon project, and we wanted to have something tangible behind it, which is why we identified the first 2,500 acres as, by way of example of the types of forest areas that we're intending to enter into the carbon project. But we also recognize that there's an important stakeholder process that needs to happen there. And so using the HCV framework as a guide, we also want to solicit feedback from, as you said, county commissioners or communities or others around which areas might be best suited for entering into the carbon project. And we want to be careful too, there's obviously, potential impacts on local mills. And so we didn't want to be too focused on one area, which is part of the reason that we're spreading it out across the west side. Also, just because there's valuable forests all across the west side and all across Washington, really. And so we didn't want to have impacts that were too heavily concentrated in one area so that it would have, a disproportionate impact on certain mills.
Nice. Okay. Looks like we got a couple of questions coming in through chat. So where did the 10,000 acres number come from?
Yeah, so there has been a lot of discussion with the public recently around older forests in Washington that, as I mentioned, are not protected by our current old growth policy. So our old growth policy currently protects forests that originated pre-1850 and are of 5 acres or greater and have, different structural characteristics of essentially high quality old growth. And so, but especially with that 1850 marker, there are a number of older forest stands that are, they could be from 1859 or something like that are 1900 that are not protected by that policy, but are nevertheless high value forested areas. And so that 10,000 acres came from an initial analysis of pre-1900 stands, so stands that were about 100 to 120 years old that were not protected by that old growth policy. And so an analysis of those forested areas came out to be about 10,000 acres. And so that's where that number came from. Although instead of drawing a bright line of using an age of just pre-1900 stands where you could have, some stands that are less ecologically valuable just because they haven't, reached that level of structural complexity that would be protected, versus you could have, a stand from 1901 that does have that important structural complexity that wouldn't be protected. And so we didn't want to just draw a sort of arbitrary line there. We wanted to be able to have some flexibility on really identifying our most ecologically valuable stands to include in the project.
Right, question. Looks like Jocko, you have your hand up. You want to ask your question?
Yes, is the small landowner assistance program a spin-off of the stewardship program?
I'm not, you might have to be more specific. I'm not sure which stewardship program you're talking about.
Well, DNR has had foresters dedicated to small landowner assistance
Yes.
for years.
Yeah, we've got our small forest landowner office and our, so that might be the stewardship program you're thinking of. So yes, it's an expansion of that existing technical assistance program.
Like one more question came through the chat is, so how long will the acres be removed from harvest?
So we're committing to not harvesting them for the future. So in perpetuity, the carbon project itself will be for 40 years. We're using the American Carbon Registry protocol. But yeah, our intent is to not harvest them even beyond that 40-year term.
All right, it looks like Hollis, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I actually was thinking I could speak to the stewardship question that was posed earlier. So the small forest landowner office had small forest landowner foresters that did both stewardship as well as technical assistance, and they have now split that into the stewardship program, and that those duties are now under the forest health districts that are being hired in each region, and then they're also going to have technical assistance foresters. So it's not just hiring the 7 foresters to cover the stewardship, but an additional, I want to say like 15 foresters plus statewide that are helping with stewardship.
Great, thank you for that, clarifying that.
All right, any more questions? We have time for a few more. No? All right, well, if anything occurs to you, you can feel free to put them in the chat and I can email them out to our speaker later on. So I'll turn it over to Elijah for our last presentation for the day.
Thanks, Andrea, and thank you, Chenka, for the talk. Super interesting. It's nice to see how that stuff is coming along for the state, and I appreciate you coming out and talking about it. For our final talk today, we're going to have some students from the Green River Community College give us a bit of information on some projects they've been working on. Jean, do you want to do the introduction for this?
I can do that. So I will introduce our students today. We've got actually 4 students doing a presentation today on the difference in water quality between spring-fed and runoff-fed urban streams immediately following a flooding event. Many of you may remember about a month ago or so, we had some flooding up here, and our students were in our stream ecology class, and they chose to do a research project on that event. And so we want to let them present their work. We've got 4 students in this project. We have Connor Johnson, we have Henry Meyer, and we have Garrick Sageman and Blake Rose. The 4 of them work together on this project. All of them are first-year students in our forestry AAS program. Several of them are going on to get a degree in parks. In fact, all of them are planning to get a degree in parks. 3 of them get a degree in GIS, a couple of them in water quality, and a couple, at least one of them in fire as well. So they're heavily into their forestry degree here and anxious to be able to, and excited about being able to present their work to SAF today. So thank you for inviting them, and I will let them go ahead and talk about their project. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Gene. Hi, so I'm Connor. This is Henry and Blake. And our project, well, originally we wanted to do something quite a bit different for our project. We wanted to look at percent canopy cover and how that affected water quality within suburban or urban streams. But due to the time of year that when we were presenting in the winter, we discovered that wouldn't have that much effect. And so we were presented with an opportunity due to a massive flooding event that occurred at the beginning of March. And so we decided to do our project on how or if there would be a difference in water quality comparing an runoff fed stream versus a spring fed stream in the Covington area. And those two streams are Little Seuss, which is the runoff fed, and Jenkins Creek, which is the spring fed stream. And, you know, urban streams play a really important role in, they channel all the water that's collected on the impervious surfaces and they channel it out. And so they play an important role, not only to our urban residents, but also they have their own ecosystems. They provide habitat for amphibians, fish, insects, and other creatures. So getting on to our question is, you know, we wanted to see if there was a difference, not necessarily if, we're not really talking about if it was good or bad water quality, but we wanted to see if there was a difference in Little Seuss, the runoff in comparison to the spring fed stream.
Gonna go over the methods?
Yeah. So we used pretty simple methods. We used some Lamont and some Hatch portable and field test kits to test for pH, dissolved oxygen, nitrogen, turbidity, and then water and air temperature. We used a stratified random sample method to gather 10 test sites at each creek. We measured dissolved oxygen multiple times to get a very overall answer. Did you want to talk about results?
We can both, if you want to start off and then I'll kick into it.
So the results we found were both what we expected and a little surprising. So we have two graphs right here and our table showing the turbidity, nitrogen, and dissolved oxygen saturation percentage. The turbidity on the spring fed stream was a lot higher than the runoff fed stream, which we'll get into a little bit later in the results on why we think that was different. But the dissolved oxygen were both fairly high at 84% for the spring fed and 68% for the runoff fed stream.
All right, so in terms of results, I'm Blake. In terms of results, the runoff fed was, so the runoff fed, we were expecting, since due to the impervious surfaces creating a higher flow and a funneling effect, the water itself actually was moving much faster. The stream itself was moving much faster. In the future, I think that what we should do if we were to test this again would be to actually record the speed of it, but that's just future testing on this if we pick up on it or someone else picks up on it. Basically, with the higher speed in the runoff fed stream, we were expecting a higher DO due to the turbulence of the water itself. We actually found completely different results in terms of that because the spring fed actually had a higher DO rate. Our theory on that is that it's possible that the amount of vegetation in the area, because there was a lot of reed canary grass and also I believe there were willow, but there was vegetation all around the spring fed area. The stream itself had overflown out of the boundaries. So it was actually running through a lot of the reed canary grass, a lot of the vegetation around it. And that might've collected the DO because plants, as they release their oxygen, they release it into the water also within, like also the air and into the water. I think with turbidity, it was a little bit surprising because we actually had a higher turbidity rate in the spring fed. That could be due to the fact that maybe since it actually did overstep the stream bank full width and flowed through much less traversed soils, it might have created more kick-up and a lot of soil floating around inside the water. That might have been the turbidity rate or the turbidity factor. And then with the spring fed, obviously, since it's moving a lot quicker, a lot faster, that would cause the turbidity to be much lower due to the sheer speed of the water itself. I can't really think of much else to talk about. What do you guys got? You guys got anything? Because, okay, so our overall overarching, we would want to, first of all, we would want to make sure that we take more points, because even though 10 was quite a bit and it created a good boundary for it, we could also test more in more spread out areas. As you can see on the map on the slide here, our sites were kind of not too far apart. We were kind of clustered together at some points. We didn't have exact distances in between our testing points. So in the future, we would want more consistent testing distance from each other. And also we would want to make sure that we test the overall speed of the water in both spring fed and runoff fed. Not sure, the streams themselves, especially Little Sue's in that area, in the Wingfield Park area that we tested, is known for flooding. So each year that tends to flood quite a bit. As for the spring fed Jenkins Creek, that one, I am unsure if it does flood. I have not been out there during the winter. I'm not sure if it floods as consistently as Little Sue's, but I know that Little Sue's is a really consistent flooder each year. So this test could be retaken in further testing on this specific river. And there's a lot more stretch of stream to actually cover and set out more plots. Does anyone have any questions?
Okay, I'll ask one. So are there any management implications then from this research that could inform maybe how streams are managed or urban streams are managed in these types of areas?
Could you repeat the question? Sorry.
Sorry, so based on your results, are there any management implications regarding how these, how urban streams could be managed in the future?
You want to take this one?
We can't really say. We weren't doing any research or collecting enough data to really say whether it could be managed one way or another. That would have to be something where we'd either change the question or we take the data we did gather and sort of used it in a different way than the way we did it. I think we would also probably need a more comprehensive approach with a bit of a different lead to address that.
Okay. All right, looks like Elijah has a question. Thanks.
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for the talk, guys. Super interesting. I'm wondering, because looking at your poster, you found that between these two streams, the one that had less turbidity had a higher dissolved oxygen rate. But you said that other papers find that usually turbidity correlates positively with like dissolved oxygen. Have you thought about possibly sampling some other stream segments to see if that's just an urban versus natural issue rather than, because maybe perhaps like within an urban grouping of streams, that relationship still holds, more turbidity, higher DO saturation.
Yes. In future testing, we would want to cover much more ground than the ground that we covered. So yeah, that's correct. It would be a much further and spread out grouping of data, and different stream systems in general would probably be much better.
All right, cool.
Right, and this is actually more of a question for Jean. We can handle the logistics after the fact, but we have a person asking if the poster will be available for download with the recorded session. So it's possible we could put that on the website, but I'll work with Jean on that to see about getting that up. Looks like Jocko, you have a question?
Oh,
Yes.
Muted. You're muted.
Hey, Jocko, could you turn your mic on?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Yes.
Did you record the vegetation stream side for any measurable distance on any of the bank sides?
Ooh, no, we did not.
We did not, but I actually think another thing we could have recorded is substrate. But we did not record the vegetation. Again, it's something, if we were to redo this, I think that would actually be helpful in addition to substrate, flow rate.
Yeah, and honestly, like this was a really good learning opportunity for us, I feel, because there was, at the end of it, there was so much more that we felt like, oh, this would be fun to go out and test this, or this would be fun to go out and test this, and we didn't get to cover that. So that was a good question. Thank you.
Right. It's like, Elijah, do you have another question, or is that the same one?
No, I have another one.
Okay.
So I guess I would ask, what was the most like unexpected thing you had to deal with actually taking field measurements?
My personal opinion was the sheer speed of the runoff fed stream. We knew that it would be fast, but there was a couple situations where we had, when covering DO, we actually had to like get a good grip on the bottle so that it didn't fly down the stream. That was definitely unexpected. You got anything else, Connor, that might be unexpected for you?
Yeah, actually kind of similar to what Blake was talking about when we were on Little Seuss, parts of, we were walking on pavement and, I had water up to my shins almost. And it was pretty incredible just how much that floods during, flood stage.
Anything that surprised you, Henry?
I thought it was really interesting to sort of walk around these areas and take a really close and in-depth look at sort of streams, because we often walk past them, but we don't take a lot of time, or at least I don't take a lot of time to sort of look at the vegetation, the water speed, and the substrate, and think about how all of that works together to create different ecosystems.
Ooh, banking off that, yeah. So what he was saying was, as for me too, also when we would go off the path, I didn't realize, like, because when I've started this program, I personally, like, I've been exploring much more places, and just getting off the beaten path and actually going into the stream and walking up the stream was eye-opening. And it was pretty like surprising that like all these different pathways that the stream takes that we don't even see because it's past the vegetation.
Yeah. Was there any members of the public out there at all when at the same time you were collecting the data? Did they ask any questions or?
No, not particularly. For some reason, I guess that wasn't really, did you have one?
Yes, when we were working at the Spring-Fred Creek on Jenkins, we had a couple members of the public stop by when we were collecting water by a bridge, and they asked us sort of what we were doing, and we explained to them that we're here testing water quality, and they seemed happy that people were out there and looking at it and making sure that it was working all right.
Sorry, I jumped on that one. It's because they were actually out there before me that day. I actually didn't get the chance to talk to anybody, but I'm really happy that they got to.
Yeah.
It's like, Jocko, do you have another question?
No, I had mine.
Oh, okay, nice. So if you're, so you guys are going to be doing another, do you foresee maybe doing another experiment on these same creeks, answering more questions or collecting more data?
Our personal future plans aren't to necessarily follow up. We've laid the groundwork for if we do decide to in the future for possibly other correlating projects, or if someone else wants to pick up the project, but we don't have any plans right now set in stone to continue on this specific test.
All right, well, we still have a little bit of time and we still have all the speakers for today still in attendance. So does anyone have any other questions that weren't asked earlier that you've been meaning to ask? No.
Now I know what it feels like to be a professor waiting for the students to teach, to talk.
Yeah, so Andrew, I was going to say, yeah, we'll make the posters available to people if they want to download them and read them. That shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, terrific. Yeah, like I said, we can post them on the website to pair with the recordings. So
Yeah, I'll work with Monica, the instructor, to see that we can get that done for everybody.
nice. Okay. All right. Well, Elijah, I'll turn it over to you then.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate you coming out and talking to us. It's pretty interesting. I like to hear it. And overall, just thanks to all the speakers and everyone that attends today. it's been great. I'm looking forward to the rest of the week. And yeah, if you have any questions, I think just pass them on to Andrea, that's at the top of the chat, or to myself. I believe our information is on the program, and you should have emails from us. But otherwise,
Okay, and actually really quick too, so for CFEs, I am sharing the link, the online survey, if you can fill it out, if you need passwords.
I want to say
Fill it out.
thank you, everybody, for your time today. Thanks
Okay.
for the opportunity. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, guys. And so tomorrow it will be inventory or no, market economics.
Yeah.
And so we have Brooks Mendel and then Rob Jenkin and Dan. Oh, sorry, drawing a blank for the Forest to Home Forterra project.
Dan Rankin, yeah.
Dan Rankin, yes, and I know his brother, so I should have known that last name. So thanks.
Yeah. Plus, we'll have some another couple of groups of students talking after them about some more kind of wetlands and riparian issues. But otherwise, if you don't have anything else, Andrea, I think we'll probably call this meeting to a close a little early today. And thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the day, and hopefully I'll see you tomorrow.